If you can connect the idea of biblical citizenship, digital citizenship and stewardship, if you can connect it to real life, if you can connect it to a product, if you can connect it to a class or a discipline, it's going to mean so much more to the students. We decided we're going to connect it to the products that we produce, so it's going to integrate right into the lessons that our teachers were already teaching.
Welcome to the BJU Press Teacher Edition podcast, where Christian educators are encouraged and inspired as we bring you interviews, practical ideas, strategies, and answer your questions about teaching in today's culture. And here's your host, Jenny Copeland.
It is amazing to think that the students we interact with each day don't even remember life without smartphones. If you stop and think about that, that's pretty amazing. More and more, the technology we consider pretty new is it something that they've never even heard of. They aren't afraid to click, they aren't afraid to share, they aren't afraid to document everything. Technology is the world they have known. They really don't even need much training in it. If they don't know how to do it immediately, they'll just figure it out. But are they doing all this use of technology from a biblical point of view? What about their time management? What about comments that they're making about others? What about their viewing habits and accessing anything that they feel like looking up at that moment? Is anyone taking time to intentionally train these students how to use technology well and appropriate, but in a God-honoring way? That takes intentionality and time and effort. Materials and resources for that are just not readily available. It takes work. These are some of the topics that are going to be discussed today and rediscussed over and over in the days ahead here at BJU Press and in the schools that we work with. Today, I want to talk about how we can put overalls on those types of discussions. Maybe the same discussions you've had at your school or with the parents of your schools. We're going to talk about that and more in this week's episode, and I'm so glad you're here. Speaking of that, I don't want to neglect to take just a moment to welcome each of you back to the Teacher Edition podcast. I thoroughly enjoy every episode and the opportunity to interact with our fantastic guests. It is such a privilege. Of course, I can't start an episode without reminding you to check out our website, teachereditionpodcast.com. We have great information there, a place to subscribe to our newsletters, and also a place where you can leave questions. I know each of you are so busy. Of course, you're educators. But I really want to encourage you to think about something that you would like to ask, or maybe take a minute to share. It will help you, and it will help hundreds of other listeners who listen in every single week. So just go do it. For those of you who are on social media, just a reminder, you can find us on Facebook as Teacher Edition Podcast, and you can find us on Instagram and TikTok at Teacher Edition Pod. And don't forget, we are on YouTube as Teacher Edition Podcast. All right, let's get into today's topic, digital citizenship, or digital stewardship, as we often hear it called in our Christian circles. I am so excited to have Larry Hunt joining us today. I've actually had the opportunity of knowing Larry and his wife for a number of years. I actually served with Larry in a couple different ministries. Larry began his educational career in Waterford, Connecticut, teaching 5th and 6th grades before becoming principal, and he was principal for over 20 years. Then in 2005, he joined a ministry in South Carolina and began teaching high school English, creative writing, journalism, Bible, and of course, he coached basketball. He also served as an assistant collegiate men's basketball coach from 2012 to 2015. He then again became principal for 6 years before joining the EdTech team here at BJU Press. Interestingly enough, Larry's impact extends, though, beyond education, actually into NASCAR fans through auto racing outreach, and previously through Unchanging Rock Ministries, which focused a gospel outreach in North Korea, believe it or not. As an ordained minister, he's been an interim pastor in Rhode Island and in South Carolina. He also has officiated high school and college sports for over 25 years. He and his wife, Melanie, they have 2 children. Larry has had an important input on some digital citizenship products that we have been working on here at the press. So I thought, even with that huge, extensive resume he has, it's so fitting to bring him in today for this topic. So welcome to the show, Larry. I'm glad you're here.
Thanks, Jenny. It's good to be here.
Okay, so at the start of the show, I talked about the need for intentional, practical, biblically solid digital citizenship materials that would guide students in this just majorly technology world that they live in. Talk with us about your burden to make that available both for educators and for students.
Sure. Well, about 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago, actually, my boss and I here at the press began to talk about the need for a digital citizenship product. I had been doing some research in digital citizenship for several months at that time, looking at some of the programs that were out there from some of the major players that I don't need to mention here. Everybody knows who they are. I began to kind of peruse through, what they're doing, what they're promoting, and there was a lot of good in that. But there was one thing that was really missing, and of course, it was the worldview. Now, the worldview was not what we have here at the press, and obviously that's a biblical worldview. So we began to talk about what can we do about that, and then of course we were thinking about does it line up with the mission of the press first of all, and it does. Our mission is doing everything we can so that Christian education can do everything it must. So the mindset of biblical digital citizenship and stewardship in the realm of technology became really a topic that we talked about for quite a long time. And we wanted to then create a product that would address this pressing issue for us as believers. And in the process of doing that, we also wanted to do something that these other programs had not done, not only from the biblical worldview aspect, but also the research that I was doing was showing that if you can connect the idea of biblical citizenship, digital citizenship, and stewardship, if you can connect it to real life, if you can connect it to a product, if you can connect it to a class or a discipline, it's going to mean so much more to the students. So rather than try to create a product that was totally separate from everything else we do and yet had a biblical worldview, we decided, no, we're going to connect it to the products that we produce. So it's going to integrate right into the lessons that our teachers were already teaching.
So it's hard to know where to start. I mean, this is a huge topic. What you're talking about here, we're going to create materials for digital citizenship. Where do you start? So talk with us about the idea and then also about the needs that really were the motivating factors to consider taking on a project of this size and width and making it available at all different ages. Talk about those motivating factors.
Well, just from the length of your question there, this is huge. And it was, where in the world do we begin, and how much do we do? How much do we talk about? It's daunting when you think about it. We decided very early that we were going to create a product that addressed the need from K-5 all the way through grade 12. One of the things I discovered in my research was that most digital citizenship programs, whether they be secular or not, stopped right around 8th grade. And I couldn't find hardly anything
They know
in
it
the
all.
high school
They know it
grades.
all at that point.
Yeah. So we decided we're going to create a product that starts in K-5, goes all the way to grade 12. And that was the first step. What was going to be the scope of it? And then, of course, if we were going to address the needs in every grade, we had to begin to think about, well, what's going to be the scope and sequence? How many lessons? And how long are they going to be? And what are the topics going to be? And all of those kinds of things that followed. So we saw that from the research I did, that digital citizenship and stewardship must be taught. So interesting in your opening, you even mentioned the fact that these things have to be taught. It's very much like you don't have to teach children how to sin. They already know how to do that. What you have to do is teach them how to do what's right. And the same is true with digital citizenship. You can have any age student get online and get in trouble right away. It's very easy for them to stray into the stuff that we don't even want them near. But in order to teach them to get online and do what's right, it has to be taught. And that was one of the first principles. The second one was it needs to have a biblical worldview. We believe that the rightness in digital citizenship comes from the principles of God's word, just like the principles are used in every other area of life. And then also we thought that digital citizenship, biblical digital citizenship, is best caught. It's best caught when learned within the context of current lessons. The research I was doing was telling us over and over that if you can connect this to something that the students know, or something that they are experiencing, or some kind of life experience, or some kind of learning experience, then their learning is going to increase exponentially if there's a connection. So we decided we're going to connect this to our product. As I mentioned already, we made that decision to start in preschool all the way through high school. And then the last thing that we decided to do was this. We also thought about, if we want our classroom teachers teaching this, we know there's going to be some classroom teachers that this will be right in their wheelhouse. They're techie, they know, and they've probably been doing some things already in this regard. But on the other end of the scale, we have teachers that are not so techie. They're maybe even hesitant or reluctant to use technology. So the lessons that we created, we wrote them a bit differently. We wrote them so a teacher could actually simply read the lesson, and we gave them the words to say. It's kind of the old-fashioned way of how teacher editions used to be written, where you just gave the teacher all the words and all the questions and all the expected answers. Well, we actually did that for these lessons, especially for people who perhaps were a little uncomfortable talking about technology. So when we wrote these lessons, we also made them familiar. We started with a lesson plan overview, and just like they're used to seeing in their teacher editions. And then we used the teaching cycle that we use in our current teachers editions: engage, instruct, apply, assess. And then we gave them the words to say, and we gave them the questions to ask. And then in addition to that, we included a PowerPoint presentation for every lesson. And we also included video. We wanted to put a video element into every lesson. So there's video, or there's video links that connect to that lesson. And then there's some kind of a follow-up activity by way of worksheet or something similar. And then we also created a ready-made email that says to the parents, dear parents, we studied and we talked about this topic in class today in regard to digital citizenship and stewardship. We want you to know what we talked about, if you have any questions. And sometimes that email would even say, feel free to do the activity with your child, to involve the parents. And so there's a ready-made email, and all the teacher has to do is edit it a little bit. And by the way, these lessons are completely editable. They're not PDFs, and they're not stuff that you can't manipulate. You can manipulate the lesson any way you want to, and the PowerPoints for that matter, to customize them for your particular use.
Actually kind of going with that, as people consider what materials they want to use, they often like to kind of know that backstory. They want to know what happens behind the scenes. So as this digital citizenship or digital stewardship project started taking shape, what was going into that development of ideas and topics and just a connection to the resources? You kind of talked about this a little bit, but are there any other behind the scenes ideas you have that you can share?
When I got to the press, and I started working part-time in the fall of 2021, one of the first things that I did is I went to lunch with one of the people who had been working in development and research. And I discovered in talking with him that he and a colleague had created this document. They had done mountains of research. And then they created a document back in 2016, and it was called CyberSmart Stewardship. And I didn't even know this document existed. So I got my hands on that document and I read it. It's about 25 pages long. And that document became foundational for my going forward with this project. And to look at what they had done in that research, to say, okay, now it's time to put that research into practical use. So that was one thing. Once we got the okay to do this, there were several months of research that I did to create. First of all the topics had to be created. Like, what are we going to talk about in K5? We're going to create 5 lessons in K5. What are we going to talk about? Many of those students can't even read yet. What are we going to talk about? So I did research on what can 5-year-olds do? What are the skills that are expected of 5-year-olds? So that led me into another area of research of looking at what are the expected skills of 5-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 7-year-olds. And among all of that research, created a chart that had 21st century skills, and it had technology skills, and what we can expect students to be able to do at certain ages or certain grade levels. So that became very helpful in coming up with the topics that we wanted to talk about with 5-year-olds and 7-year-olds and 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds. And by the way, those topics are all charted in the front matter of this project. So if you're an elementary school teacher and you see it there, go to the front matter and you can see the chart. The chart has all the topics, and it has all of the essential question. Every topic has an essential question. And then it has also the lesson connection to what lesson does this connect to in our current BJU products. So those are some of the things that happened in the background. And I guess maybe it'd be appropriate to maybe just kind of go through the process real quick here. Once we had the topics, and I cleared those with our team, then we went into sessions. We call it blueprinting here at the press. The blueprinting time was made up of someone from educational technology, someone from biblical worldview, a person from instructional design. And so there were 3 or 4 of us, and then we went in and we created a blueprint for every one of these lessons. And the blueprint included the topic, the essential question, all of the student objectives, and all of the biblical worldview statements for every lesson. That took several weeks to create, and we came up with a total of 57 lessons. There's 5 lessons, K through 8, and then there's 3 lessons, 9 through 12. So there's 57 lessons that were blueprinted. And then once that was finished, I started writing the actual lessons, taking that blueprint and creating a lesson plan overview, creating the lessons, the teaching cycle for the teacher, and then creating, we actually did create some video, or finding video links that helped in teaching these concepts, making a worksheet, creating email, and that went on for several months. And in that process, those lessons went through several checks. And I want to say we've got some very, very talented people here at the press. You got to have a thick skin because the editors are good. They're very good. The instructional design people are very good. So you have to be willing to take their advice because they're very talented. So that's the editing process. Biblical worldview people look at it. Editors look at it. Permissions people look at it. If you're using other video, there's a lot of steps that each lesson went through until we finally had a finished product.
Okay, so we have some of the background. I find out as I travel, people really don't know what Be CyberSmart is. They haven't heard of it. And so you're kind of it's kind of veiled. You've kind of told us about it. You've walked us down a path, but we don't really know what it is. So can you tell us about the actual program itself? What came out of all these ideas and all that work? What do we have available?
So if you think of it in terms of the products that you already have, you have teacher's editions, you have student editions, you might have a student activities manual, you might have a lab book. What we created are the teacher materials. So Be CyberSmart is the creation of teacher materials. There's no student materials here because this is a fully digital program. So the teacher has all the materials. The only thing that the students will have or get would be whatever the activity is at the end of the lesson. So the students don't need anything. The teacher has everything. And these are located in TTO, and they'll also be in Trove. And where they're located is we have connected these. We kind of thought, where do they connect best? Should they be science lessons? Should they be math lessons? Or where should they be connected? So we decided to connect them to the English product, whether it be English or whether it be writing and grammar, depending upon the grade level. So these lessons appear in the writing and grammar or in the English lessons in the drop-down. One of the first things you'll see is when you go to your grade level and then you go to English or writing and grammar, when you see the drop-down, you will see Be CyberSmart. And all of the information is there when you click on it. The front matter is there, all the lessons are there, all the PowerPoints are there, everything that you need is there. That's where it is. And by the way, I failed to mention that these are mini lessons. These lessons are meant to be delivered in a 20-minute period. One of the things we wrestled with was, hey, we already have a product out there and it already has 180 lessons. Why are we trying to add 5 lessons to 180? Well, you can't do that. So what we did was we connected these mini lessons, these 20-minute lessons, to current lessons, and we're giving the teacher the opportunity to use that mini lesson in that particular place. You say, well, how do they do that? Well, I've been a teacher, you've been a teacher, and if you have something that you really want to use, you figure out how to use it, don't you?
Absolutely.
And sure enough, that's what's happening. It may be that they don't do an exercise or 2 in their grammar book that day. They do this instead. The teacher figures that out. And I think once they get into one lesson, they will want to teach the other 4 that are coming down the line. And they are spread out throughout the entire year. They're not all bunched up into a 2-week period. They are spread out throughout the year. So you can see where we've connected the lessons. And I might say this too, this is where we've connected them because we know they fit quite well. But if the teacher sees the lesson and says, I want to connect that somewhere else, it's very, very simple to do that. Just pull it into the lesson you want. Where we've connected it is simply where we suggest it fits well. But if it fits better somewhere else for you, then use it there. It may even fit in a different discipline for you. Once you see the lesson, you might say, I want to use that in history. I want to use that in science. It can be used anywhere.
Okay, so I know in creating this, there were so many different models that have, you could have followed a full year model, a certain grade model. They had to have a credentialed teacher, a strict schedule. No doubt there are many teachers listening to this and hearing about Be CyberSmart for the very first time, and they're trying to decide, is this something that I could do? Is this really something I can fit into my day? I know you created this as an educator for educators, and you've kind of mentioned it already, but talk with us about how educators can adopt this into their classrooms and into their schedules. You kind of told us where to find it. How do we make it fit?
Well, in order to use the lessons, there has to be a fitting of sorts. And, when that happens, you might have to look ahead and say, well, I don't think I have time to do everything I want to do. I need to find time. And so it might be stealing a little bit of time here, there, and everywhere in order to be able to do it. If you need 20 minutes, which is what we are recommending, maybe it's not 20 minutes just out of the ELA lessons. It could be a little bit out of there. It could be a little bit out of another class. And that's the good thing. We're not looking for 40 or 50 minutes.
True.
We're looking for 20. And I think everybody can find that. We have interruptions all the time in school, right? We have fire drills. We have half days. We have, we're going to school 2 hours late today. Oh, we missed a whole day. What am I going to do? My calendar says. We all face that as teachers. And so it's 20 minutes. And I think it's we think it's an important 20 minutes. Again, we are driving students online. We're driving them in a lot of ways to use the computer, to research, to find information. In addition, they use their phones in the older grades. They use their phones for everything. And these topics don't only cover school things. They cover things like cyberbullying and social media misuse. And there's 4 lessons from grade 8 through 12 on artificial intelligence, generative AI. There's some very mature topics in 11th and 12th grade that don't necessarily just deal with school. These lessons are connected to ELA lessons, but they could be used in other places. There may be a school even that wants to teach them in sequence, or there may be a teacher who wants to take these lessons and perhaps connect them to literature instead of the grammar lesson, or to history because of what they're teaching that day. So as long as they're aware of them and what the topics are and what the objectives are, they're very flexible. As a teacher, those to me sometimes when I was teaching, they were challenges. They weren't hurdles. If your principal came to you and said, "Hey, we're taking the last hour of school and we're going to have an assembly," I'd be like, "Okay, I figured it out," and I think they can figure it out.
So true. Thank you, Larry. I really appreciate your time today. I appreciate your insights. It's always an extra blessing to get to connect with someone who has marinated in a project. They just have those insights and that input that you don't get from others. So listeners, I hope this has piqued your interest in the Be CyberSmart materials, and I hope you're going to go check those out and let the Lord use those even in your own life as well as in the lives of your students. And Larry, thank you again for taking time to kind of take us backstage today. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it too.
Listeners, thank you for joining us today. I hope you were challenged and encouraged as I was. Remember to go to teachereditionpodcast.com to submit questions for upcoming episodes. Of course, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on social media. Now, it's time to get back to your day. But it's not just any day. Every day in the classroom is your day to impact and inspire through God's power and through His grace working in you. Go do what God has called you to do.